Hey everybody, welcome to another video episode of OK Talks. For anybody who's listening to the audio version on one of the podcast platforms, if you like, the show is now up on YouTube, where you can almost certainly find it by typing OK Talks into the search bar. I'm your host, Oliver Kendall. I'm a lifelong political nerd with a background in international relations and security policy who's worked in domestic U.S. politics and also had the good fortune to have visited and lived in a number of countries besides my own. Channeling those experiences, I do my best on the show to translate what's going on in my own country for my non-U.S. listeners and to help shed some light for the folks back home on some events of note going on in the rest of the world. So there are a couple of things that I want to talk about at some point this week, but I think I may end up dividing it into two separate episodes for the sake of one being able to be more relevant for Democrats abroad, since Democrats abroad can't really get into foreign policy questions at all for the sake of its membership. But who knows? Maybe I will just end up doing one. I don't know. In any case, one thing that I know that I want to talk about today will echo some of the messaging from elected Democrats who have lately decided to just point out the fact that some of the Republicans right now are just kind of weird. And I love that we're openly talking about this. So the thing I wanted to sort of zero in on in this episode is this Republican obsession with people reproducing, not with kids per se. I mean, they torpedoed the renewal of President Biden's child tax credit, which had cut child poverty by 50% in President Biden's first year in office. They seem to be against school lunch programs, and their only answer to school shootings seems to be to arm the teachers. So no, not kids. I mean, they seem to be obsessed with the idea of people having kids, whether they want them or not, per their abortion policy. And we've seen this for a little while now. Like Congressman Steve King, who used to be the craziest member of the House GOP caucus until like a third of the current people rolled up, once said some weird shit about people not having enough babies as part of his usual like super anti-immigrant shtick. What was the quote? Right. "We can't restore our civilization with someone else's babies," he once wrote on Twitter. Now, I'm all for preserving and protecting liberal Western civilization. But the great thing about the liberal West, America in particular, is others can join. It's about a set of ideas, not an ethnic group. I'm kind of guessing that's more how Congressman King meant it. We've also seen Republicans go absolutely apeshit when Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that she's not sure she wants kids because, well, the world is kind of a hot mess at the moment. So much so apeshit they went, that is to say, that Senator Mike Lee felt compelled to go onto the Senate floor and give this speech.
The solution to so many of our problems, at all times and in all places, is to fall in love, get married, and have some kids.
Now, for the record, there's nothing wrong, of course, with having kids. I would argue that there is such a thing as too many, but okay. In all seriousness, nothing wrong at all with having kids. I know many members of the audience have children, including my parents, who I think are listening. Hi, Mom and Dad. Also, thanks. Having kids, bottom line, is, of course, totally fine. It's great. I am, as it were, pro-choice when it comes to this issue. But this thing among a certain subset of Republicans about this like desperate, all-consuming need to reproduce, like posturing themselves as, everyone's parent awkwardly asking your new girlfriend, who you now very much regret having brought to Thanksgiving when you've only been dating for 6 weeks, asking her when she's going to give them some grandkids. It's just, it's a weird role for them to like take on as a party. And they seem to have sort of doubled down on that with the selection of JD Vance to be Trump's running mate. Vance, a man who, as I talked about a bit in the last episode, has a lot of out-of-the-mainstream views when it comes to social policy. Like, women should maybe stay in violent marriages, for example. But another of his weird things in this area is that he is another of these Republicans who's just obsessed with the idea that everyone needs to have kids. I know everybody's already seen the clip of him on Tucker Carlson's show where he says that America is run by childless cat ladies. Here, I just want to say, what a great ticket balancer for Trump. I mean, Trump famously hates dogs. He's always using dog as in choke like a dog, bailed like a dog, whatever. So Trump hates dogs. Vance apparently hates cats. So to pet owners everywhere, I guess, the Trump-Vance message to you is unless your furry friend is a parrot, a gerbil, or a turtle, well, you can go fuck yourself. On another note, whether you're a lover of cats and dogs, and I hope you are, hi. If you haven't already done so, please do be sure to hit subscribe or follow the channel or whatever it's called on whichever platform you listen. That way you don't miss the next episode, and it's also helpful for the algorithm. Also helpful if you feel like doing me a solid, hit like or leave a comment, and most importantly, share the show with anybody you think might get something out of it. Thanks as always to anybody who already has. Thanks in advance to anyone else who will. Okay, so getting back on track. I assume you've all probably already seen the crazy cat lady clip, but I'm going to play one more where Vance talks about people who don't have kids. Listen to just how repulsed this man is by people whose first move upon hitting puberty wasn't to immediately try to reproduce.
These basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really, really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. And of course, you talk about going on Twitter. Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter, and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
Hear that? Not having kids makes you, quote, more sociopathic. If you don't have kids, you're sociopathic. Childless sociopaths for Harris, I guess. So, among his weird pronouncements about the idea that having kids is the only thing that could possibly give life any meaning, Vance has also basically come out and said that people with kids should get to vote more than people without them. And here I'm forced to ask, what does that even look like? Would that just be a binary situation where if you have kids you get 2 votes, if you don't have kids you get 1 vote? Or does the extent to which you have a say in American democracy correlate specifically to the extent of your progeny? So in JD Vance's world, do the Duggar family and the John and Kate plus 8 people get their own congressman or something? This is just, again, weird. It's weird. I've talked in previous episodes, 66 and 67 in particular, the ones focused on third-party candidates, about how the U.S. political system encourages us basically to divide preemptively into 2 blocks, which is a bad thing for the country overall, I think, as I discuss more in those episodes. But it is what it is. And in a system wherein we are all basically pushed to divide into 2 blocks, there are inevitably going to be some weirdos who are going to have to be tolerated by each side. I could think of a number of ways in which this manifests in my own left of center Democratic coalition. Marianne Williamson comes to mind. But for now, I will just settle on the example that is the most front of mind for me for reasons that I will save for the hypothetical next episode, which is the fact that the Democratic coalition involves some number of people who have, unfortunately, revealed themselves to be just rabidly anti-Semitic. Now, I feel compelled here to throw in the caveat that it is perfectly reasonable to protest the actions of the current terrible Israeli government, and not everyone who's done so over the last number of months is anti-Semitic. Many are obviously not and have genuinely good intentions. But just as obviously, to anyone who observes this at all closely, an uncomfortably high number of the people who have come out to protest Israel over the last number of months have a position on Israel that is pretty damn hard to distinguish from David Duke and Nick Fuentes' position on Israel, which is weird, I'll just say, for lack of wanting to use more colorful adjectives. My point being, there are people in both party coalitions who hold broadly unpopular, out of the mainstream, frankly offensive views. But we didn't just nominate one of our weirdest weirdos to be the vice presidential nominee. And Kamala Harris isn't going to pick Linda Sarsour or Jeremy Corbyn or something to be her vice presidential candidate. And okay, the normal thing here to do would be for Vance to walk back these various comments and try to put it behind them. But of course they can't do that because, well, first of all, because Vance clearly believes this shit. He quite obviously believes that you're basically a failure as a human being if you haven't passed along your genes. Second, the whole Trump ethos is to just attack all the time and never apologize for anything. So they really don't have the walk back option. So instead, true to form, the Trump Vance ticket is choosing the grossest option available to them, which is to really like lean into this and use it to smear Kamala Harris for not having biological children. Of course, Trump has children. He has 5 children that we know of by 3 different women, all of whom he's known to have cheated on. Can you imagine, like, for a second, what they would say about Kamala Harris if she had 5 children with 3 different men? I'm tempted to imagine what they would say now, but I also assume that it would quickly go to a level of racism, misogyny, and slut-shaming that I'm not comfortable saying out loud into a microphone, even just as a thought experiment. What makes all this more weird, and I think potentially more politically problematic for the Trump-Vance ticket, is the fact that Kamala Harris has several stepchildren through her husband, children she's apparently very much a mother to the point of her husband's ex-wife like coming out in the last couple of days and tweeting things in defense of Kamala Harris that imply as much. But here are Vance and the other like birth-obsessed weirdos around him implying that Harris is like some sort of failure as a human being because she has not herself like personally physically had children. Now, speaking myself as a childless person who isn't sure that I ever want any, and I know for a fact that I'm not alone in that, I would just like to say right now to JD Vance and others who share his strange view on this, fuck you for implying that the only way that my life could have any meaning is by me reproducing. I doubt I'm alone in having that reaction to this weird nonsense. Furthermore, this message that if you haven't had kids, like you suck, basically, like this message is deeply offensive to people who maybe wanted to have children, but were for whatever reason unable to. Maybe even because some segment of the Republican Party want to block access to in vitro fertilization. But also, like, what is the message that they're sending to people who have a parental relationship that isn't biological? I mean, clearly they're trying to imply that Kamala Harris, like, doesn't love her stepchildren because they didn't, like, physically come from her, which is, A, I assume, personally rather offensive to a lot of step-parents in a way that goes beyond just, like, some policy disagreement over taxes or whatever, and B, well, ironic when the Republican ticket is led by a man whose relationship with his kids could be described with a lot of adjectives, but loving sure as hell isn't the first one that comes to mind. I mean, really, is the desperate, years-long, like almost pathetic public ass-kissing campaign waged by poor Don Jr. and Eric toward their father really the normal behavior of kids secure in the unconditional love of their parents? But, okay. With this attack on Harris, they're implying parents don't love their stepkids because they're not biological theirs. Okay, so, but then what about adopted children? Does JD Vance think that the titular character in The Mandalorian does not love Baby Yoda? Because there are a whole lot of dead stormtroopers who could probably tell him otherwise. And in all seriousness, to just translate the pop culture reference there for any who aren't Star Wars fans, I assume this whole thing from Vance and those around him is pretty fucking offensive to a whole lot of adopted children and their parents. Well, you know what? I was originally in this episode going to take another swing at the press, but I'm going to leave that for that follow-up episode I might do, because to be fair, the press has been doing a pretty decent job covering this stuff that I've just been talking about. Now, if we could just get them to write fewer stupid process stories about Harris's quote-unquote coronation and more about the fact that the MAGA Republican Party has been systematically putting extremist election denier nut jobs into key electoral administration positions in swing states in order to try to create chaos in the vote counts on election night. But I'll save that for later. For now, childless, crazy, cat lady sociopaths for Harris, am I right? All right, that's it for this episode of OK Talks. If you like the show and want to make sure not to miss the next episode, be sure to hit subscribe or follow the channel or whatever it's called on whichever platform you're listening or watching. If you really want to do me a solid, please do be sure to hit subscribe, hit like and leave a comment, and most importantly, be sure to share the show with anybody you think might get something out of it. Thanks as always to anybody who already has. Thanks in advance to anyone who will. Thanks as always to Nate Wright for having designed the podcast artwork, and to everyone else for listening.